see how many.
Three.
Hello, everybody. I'm Chris, author of Poetry Changes Lives. This is the book, of course, and this is the paperback. And thank you for coming on the show today. We had a great show last week with a lot of questions. If you have any questions, do put them in the chat box. It's live now, so it'd be great to get a lot of questions. Last week we had a lot, and it was really interesting, actually. The theme of today's event is Come As You Are, which means what it says, I think, really. Anybody's welcome. Don't worry, nobody needs to put on a show. There's no competition about this. We're just having a chat about things that interest us. I've got a friend with me this evening who's also a published author, Rupert Wolfe-Murray. Would you like to say hello, Rupert?
Oh, hi. Yeah. Hi. Hello.
He's going to read out a few questions, I hope, and he'll be.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to help Chris get the show on the road regarding this book, his great book, Poetry Changes Lives. And
yes, a few years now.
I introduced him to my mother, Stephanie, who actually was the editor of it.
Canongate
Yeah.
Books in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's not me, that was her.
Right. Well, thank you. Right, I think we'd better start. Come As You Are is actually the name of a very nice poem, I think, by that wonderful 19th century poet, Indian by birth, Rabindranath Tagore. And I thought I would start by reading it. It's quite short, but it's, I think, very, very nice. Here we are. Come as you are. Come as you are. Tarry not over your toilette. If your braiding has come loose, if the parting of your hair be not straight, if the ribbons of your bodice be not fastened, do not mind. Come as you are. Tarry not over your toilette. Come with quick steps over the grass. If your feet are pale with the dew, if your anklets slacken, if pearls drop out of your chain, do not mind. Come with quick steps over the grass. Do you see the clouds wrapping the sky? Flocks of cranes fly up from the further riverbank, and fitful gusts of wind rush over the heath. The anxious cattle run to their stalls in the village. Do you see the clouds wrapping the sky? In vain you light your toilette lamp. It flickers and goes out in the wind. Surely, who would know that with lamp black your eyelids are not touched, for your eyes are darker than rain clouds. In vain you light your toilette lamp. It goes out. Come as you are. Tarry not over your toilette. If the wreath is not woven, who cares? If the wrist chain has not been tied, leave it by. The sky is overcast with clouds. It is late. I think that's a very beautiful poem. It's really talking about the, time is fleeting. Time is often a great theme of poetry. Shakespeare, of course, was always talking about time speeding by. Lots of other poets do as well. So I just want to deal with a couple of questions that were raised or have been raised recently. First of all, I was asked by E. Ash, I think yesterday, he or she asked, do you have a favorite Christmas poem? And the answer is yes, but I'd like to just save it for a little bit nearer Christmas. But I have got another very favourite poem about winter, which I thought would do. I hope you agree with me, E. Ash. This is Shakespeare's wonderful poem, Winter, that I think is so evocative of the freezing cold. I think we're getting a very cold spell coming today and tomorrow in the UK, so it may be appropriate. This is from Shakespeare's play Love Labour's Lost, and I think it's extraordinary, beautiful imagery. Here we are, winter. When icicles hang by the wall, and Dick the shepherd blows his nail, and Tom bears logs into the hall, and milk comes frozen home in pail. When blood is nipped and ways be foul, then nightly sings the staring owl, to wit, to woo, a merry one note, while greasy Joan doth keel the pot. When all aloud the wind doth blow, and coughing drowns the parson's saw, and birds sit brooding in the snow, and Marian's nose looks red and raw. When roasted crabs hiss in the bowl, then nightly sings the staring owl, to wit, to woo, a merry note, while greasy Joan doth keel the pot. I think that's absolutely super. I love the imagery of Marian's nose is red and raw, and greasy Joan doth keel the pot. So that's the answer to that question, or part of it anyway, and I'll have my favourite Christmas poem later on in December. Another question was asked me by Annabelle, which was, who was your favourite female poet? And there are so many to choose from, but for me, it has to be just one person from a long time ago, because she was the one who really started it all, I think. I mean, you could say that Homer started poetry in the West, but this lady started real sort of lyrical love poetry. Homer was epic, historical, and I mean, very beautiful, and he certainly had a lot of elements of love and other feelings in it. But I think this lady, Sappho, really started poetry as we know it today, poetry of love, of feelings, of inspiration, and of sort of self-knowledge and healing as well, I think. And I just find it extraordinary that 2,000 years ago, 2,000 years plus years ago, she was writing poetry in Greece, in ancient Greece, that, I'll give you a few snippets, because nearly all her poetry we have in fragments, just 200 odd fragments. And she was writing 2,000 years ago words like this: stand and face me, my love, and scatter the grace from your eyes. And this: you came, I was longing for you. You beheld a heart brimming with desire. Or this: love shook me like the wind in the mountain, rushing over the oak trees. And this: in the crooks of your body I find my religion. I think those words are just so astonishing. And in the UK, in England in those days, in the year 600 BC, nobody was really writing anything. I mean, the
I think you should read the first line too.
yeah, okay, I will in a minute. I mean, it took till about 500 AD, that's 1,000 years after Sappho, for someone to actually write a bit of poetry in England. And that's, as far as we know, was Piers Plowman, which was beautiful in its own way. But wow, I mean, Sappho was writing these beautiful words. I'll give you a couple more. Rupert has pointed out this one. May I write words more naked than flesh, stronger than bone, more resilient than sinew, more sensitive than nerve. Extraordinary. And this, which I think is the most beautiful of all, which to me is just a voice speaking to us from 2,500 years ago. You may forget, but let me tell you this: someone in some future time will think of us. And she's absolutely right. We are, in some future time, 2,500 years later, still thinking of Sappho. And I think that's just so amazing. I find it very, very moving, actually. And that's why I think Sappho is my favorite poet. You know, we're very lucky to have any of her stuff. You know, so much of it is in fragments, and I mean fragments. It's quite extraordinary. A lot of her poetry was found wrapped on papyrus. I mean, written on papyrus that was wrapped round Egyptian mummies. Not the really old mummies, but the Egyptian mummies of maybe 300 or 400 BC or even, 100 BC, 100 AD. Some of them were wrapped. The outer wrappings were parchment that contained fragments of Sappho's poetry. And it's just so astonishing that those fragments have come to us today, and they've been beautifully compiled, particularly by a lady called Anne Carson in her book called If Not Winter. But I really recommend that book if you have a mind to exploring Sappho. I really recommend that. So there we are. That's a rather lengthy answer to the question, who is my favorite female poet? But of course, there are so many over the centuries. It just we're so lucky. I think really female poetry is, in many respects, I prefer it to poetry written by men. But that's another story.
What's the name of that author, If Not Winter?
Anne Carson. She wrote it. Yes, If Not Winter is the name. Yes, and lastly, I had in the chat last week, I was asked by someone if I knew the poem "The Panther" by that wonderful German poet Rilke. And I had to say I didn't know it, but I have looked into it, and I think it's a brilliant poem, even in translation. So my German is minimal. I think it's brilliant in translation, and I'm going to read it now. So thank you for the question. Here it is, The Panther. His vision from the constantly passing bars has grown so weary that it cannot hold anything else. It seems to him there are 1,000 bars, and behind the bars, no world. As he paces in cramped circles over and over, the movement of his powerful soft strides is like a ritual dance around a center in which a mighty will stands paralyzed. Only at times the curtain of the pupils lifts quietly. An image enters in, rushes down through the tensed, arrested muscles, plunges into the heart, and is gone. Gosh, I think that's another brilliant image. And so much of poetry, so much great poetry is about animals, particularly, of course, talking about animals in captivity, which can often be a heartrending sight to many people. I mean, I think I said last week, William Blake, the wonderful early 19th century poet, he said, "A robin redbreast in a cage puts all heaven in a rage." And I thought I'd just use that as a bit of a theme today.
A question here.
All right, a question. Okay. What's the...
Do you have a favorite form of poetry?
Well, a favorite form of poetry. I love any poetry that, I think somebody once famously described it as, sends a shiver down your spine. Any poetry that does that for me is my sort of poetry. And I'm not fixated on one particular. There's some poems I return to again and again, particularly Shakespeare, of course, but also my favorite poets, William Butler Yeats, Edna St. Vincent Millay, Byron, some of the modern poets, I think T.S. Eliot, though he's a little bit sort of over-educated, I think sometimes. More modern poets, I love William Carlos Williams, Sylvia Plath. Oh gosh, I mean, it's just endless. I'm not terribly fond of the very wordy, slightly sort of epic-sounded English poets like Tennyson or Swift or even Robert Browning. I like poetry to really engage with the feelings, and I find there are a lot of poets really do take you by surprise sometimes. Seamus Heaney once said, poetry can catch the heart off guard, and suddenly, people like even sort of Tennyson can suddenly hit you with something that really makes you shiver, I find. So the answer is I don't actually have a particular form of poetry, but
he asked what you mean by the form of poetry. Can I ask that?
Form of poetry. Well, yes, I mean more lyrical than epic, more about feelings than about events, and more personal than general, I think. I don't mind if a poem rhymes or doesn't rhyme, or whether it has a meter or, well, I think all poets have a kind of a meter of some sort. But I don't like poems that are really long, I'm afraid. I like my poems preferably to be 1 or 2 pages at the most. I hope that answers your question, but if you want to take it further, I'll try and answer.
Summarize that in a little quote.
Thank you. But going back to animals in poetry, there are so many versions. Of course, we talked about the robin redbreast, tiger, tiger shining bright in the forests of the night. And then we have caged birds. My goodness.
Just a final question from Robin now.
Yeah.
He said, my teacher was looking for sonnet, villanelle, free-form couplets, but I found that parameter too restrictive.
Well, I think a sonnet now and again is okay. I think you don't want to certainly restrict yourself to any one form, I would say. I think villanelles are absolutely delightful, actually. I love the idea. I mean, they come from sort of medieval France, I think, originally. And I love the idea of, a refrain in poetry. It sort of takes you back to sort of almost sort of ancient Greek drama and the chorus. I very much like a refrain in poetry, and I think Dylan Thomas, of course, his wonderful villanelle, "Do not go gentle into that good night," or Sylvia Plath, "The stars go waltzing out in blue and red. I think that you enticed me into bed." I think they're wonderful, and they're villanelles of a kind. So I wouldn't be put off really by a rigid form, though you do want to vary it with a lot of other poetry, I think. But in some ways, I think a villanelle is one of my most favorite kinds of poetry. Okay, I hope that answers it. What was I saying? Oh yes, I was going on about animals in captivity, and I was going to read a couple of poems about a caged bird. First is Maya Angelou's, of course, wonderful The Caged Bird. Here it is. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill, a thing unknown, but longed for still. But his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade word winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams, his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown, but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. It's kind of a sad poem, that. And there's another very similar one from Tagore that I'll just read a bit of. It's about the tame bird was in a cage. The tame bird was in a cage, the free bird was in the forest. They met when the time came. It was a decree of fate. The free bird cries, "Oh, my love, let us fly to the wood. The cage bird whispers, come hither, let us both live in the cage. Says the free bird, among bars, where is there room to spread one's wings? Alas, cries the cage bird, I should not know where to sit perched in the sky. The free bird cries, my darling, sing the songs of the woodlands. The cage bird sings, sit by my side, I'll teach you the speech of the learned. And it goes on like that, but it's obviously, it's a very familiar theme for a lot of poets. And I think it gives us a lot of food for thought about how we treat nature. And my goodness me, these days, how we treat nature should be our number one concern, in my view. But I did come across so many beautiful poems particularly about birds. I wanted to read one or two more, just not all of them, just a little bit to give you a taste of how many different ways there are of talking about birds. Here's Edgar Allan Poe's famous poem, The Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, quietly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. 'Tis some visitor, I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, only this and nothing more. Ah, distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here for evermore. A very sad poem. Edgar Allan Poe, of course, was the master of mystery, and he, apart from writing very moody, mysterious poetry, he also really kicked off the whole idea of crime and horror fiction. And I always think of Edgar Allan Poe. There's a story about him that he couldn't write unless he had his pet cat wrapped around the back of his neck. And I just picture him quite often sitting in his study with his cat sitting on his shoulders, writing. He was very troubled man, Edgar Allan Poe. Had a terrible childhood and a pretty terrible adulthood as well. Rather took to drink and drugs as well, poor man. But he wrote some brilliant stuff.
There's an interesting comment here about Sim saying, I think we need more poems about pigeons. So sad how they were domesticated and then abandoned by humans. Homing basically almost extinct now. Lost the knowledge of how to build nests, and then they're called street rats.
Well, thank you, Sim. Yes, that's a thought. There are some poems about pigeons. I mean, I know what you mean in the certainly in the Elizabethan times and that sort of thing. There were dovecots everywhere, and poets' doves were very much treasured. And I think homing pigeons, as far as I know, they still, there are certainly in the UK, there are still clubs that are very much into homing pigeons, and they did and still do perform useful work and are fascinating creatures. Nobody quite understands how they manage to operate. I think wood pigeons today, when I go around London, as I do a fair amount, of course, I see a lot of pigeons, and there aren't as many as there once used to be. And I think the fact that London and other big cities are not as dirty as they used to be, well, the buildings anyway, aren't quite as dirty as they used to be 100 years ago. I think pigeons to me do look somewhat cleaner and happier. I know they may not build so many nests these days as they used to, but certainly in Richmond Park, where I am fairly close to where I live, I see a lot of pigeons there, and they all look remarkably happy to me. So I think pigeons, I'm not an expert on bird species, but I would say they are not so much a threatened species as some of our native birds. But I mean, basically, we should more and more, I think, be giving care and regard to these matters and making sure that our native species are not wiped out. And nature in general should be encouraged to thrive. I have a notice on my front door saying, or beside my front door, saying nightingales once used to sing here, which is produced by a very admirable lady who is Juliet Nolan, who runs organization. She is the MP for Nature, though she's not actually an elected member of Parliament, but that is her name and her website. And she is a very, very much a warrior on behalf of nature in this country. And I recommend her website as well. So, pigeons, thank you very much, Sim, for your question. I don't want to go on about birds too much, but I really like this poem by that wonderful and strange reclusive American lady, Emily Dickinson, who spent a large part of her life writing poetry in her upstairs bedroom in Amherst, Massachusetts. And she produced something like 1,700 wonderful poems that a lot of them were little known during her lifetime. But she has the most amazing, quirky view of the world, of life and nature, and all kinds of fascinating other things. And I very much like this little poem she wrote called A Bird Came Down the Walk. A bird came down the walk. He did not know I saw. He bit an angleworm in halves and ate the fellow raw. And then he drank a dew from a convenient grass, and then hopped sideways to a wall to let a beetle pass. He glanced with rapid eyes that hurried all abroad, They looked like frightened beads, I thought. He stirred his velvet head, like one in danger, cautious. I offered him a crumb, and he unrolled his feathers and rode him softer home. Then oars divide the ocean, two silver for a seam, or butterflies of banks of noon leap plashless as they swim. I think that's lovely. Emily Dickinson might well have been talking about a pigeon, actually, when she wrote that. I think it's a lovely image of a bird unrolling his feathers as he rode softer home. You know, the way birds walk in that sort of rolling gait. I love that poem. Well, we're in the season of autumn right now, and I was thinking I quite often go for a walk in the park around me, and there's some very good poems written about autumn too. I thought I'd read one by Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau was an American in the 19th century, living, I think, in Massachusetts. He was a great humanist. He spent 2 years living alone in the woods in a cabin with no sort of modern of his day amenities, simply to sort of discover himself and learn independence and all that sort of thing. And he was a great thinker. He came up with, among other things, you know, the whole sort of idea of existentialism, that we alone are responsible for our lives, and we have to take responsibility and do what we think right and face the consequences. And he also had some very interesting political ideas, such as he was the idea of civil disobedience, of passive disobedience, started with Henry David Thoreau, a very remarkable man in many ways. I like his poetry too. This one is called I Am the Autumnal Sun. Sometimes a mortal feels in himself nature. Not his father, but his mother stirs within him, and he becomes immortal with her immortality. From time to time, she claims kindredship with us, and some globule from her veins steals up into our own. I am the autumnal sun. With autumn gales my race is run. When will the hazel put forth its flowers, or the grape ripen under my bowers? When will the harvest or the hunter's moon turn my midnight into mid-noon? I am all sere and yellow, and to my core mellow. The mast is dropping within my woods. The winter is lurking within my moods, and the rustling of the withered leaf is the constant music of my grief. I think that's a very reflective poem.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Yeah, so I wanted to add something from the book. Was it called In Walden Woods, where he lived?
Walden, yes.
He lived in the woods on his own for a couple of years. And a bit that really struck me in memory was when he met a rather poor working class man came to visit him, and this man had a full-time job in a factory, and was saying how much he's struggling to basically put food on the table for the kids because all the food in the shops are expensive. and and he's got to pay rent, and he's got to pay this and that, and he's just living in absolute poverty. And he's saying, well, I haven't got any money at all, and I'm living very comfortably, and just living off the land by I can't remember what exactly he ate, but was he hunting or fishing? And
I think he a bit of that, yes,
Yeah.
but
he
mostly
lived without money, didn't he?
yes.
And
I think it was mostly sort of nuts and seeds he was living on.
and he said, I'm living in luxury, something like that.
Yes. Well, I think, it's true. You don't need money to feel rich. I know it can be very difficult in the modern world to accept that, but a lot of people do manage to live on very little, and they do not feel unhappy. There's so many unforeseen consequences that arrive with a lot of money that not that I've particularly ever experienced living with a lot of money, but no, I'm happy the way I am personally. But thank you for that, Rupert. I just thought I'd read this other poem, which is by that wonderful 20th century poet, Charles Causley, who he was featured on the BBC the other day. I think he's written he died some time ago, but he wrote a wonderful poem called Eden Rock, which was about dying and seeing his parents again in the afterlife. And he also wrote this great poem, I Am the Great Sun, that was inspired by seeing something written on a medieval crucifix in a church in Normandy. And I think, though it's not a very religious poem particularly, it's very spiritual, I think. And I really recommend the poetry of Charles Causley if you don't know his poetry already. Here it is.
Sorry, how do you spell his name?
Charles Causley.
C-A-U, is that?
Causley. Okay. He wrote a poem called Eden Rock. And this is I Am the Great Sun. Quite short. I am the great sun. I am your husband, but you turn away. I am the captive, but you do not free me. I am the captain, but you will not obey. I am the truth, but you will not believe me. I am the city where you will not stay. I am your wife, your child, but you will leave me. I am that God to whom you will not pray. I am your counsel, but you will not hear me. I am your lover, whom you will betray. I am the victor, but you do not cheer me. I am the holy dove, who you will slay. I am your life, but if you will not name me, seal up your soul with tears and never blame me. Wow, I think that's a powerful poem. That poem speaks to me. Gosh, I really love that poem, and I think it's a profoundly great poem. Well, talking of nature and winter walks, and we're getting towards the end of this session. Are there any other questions that you noticed, Rupert?
There's some interesting one about he ate purslane. What's his name in the Walden Woods?
Thoreau.
He wrote he ate purslane, and I said, "What's purslane?" And it seems to be a it's a commonly foraged green here in the US. It's often considered a weed, but we pick it for salads and sandwich greens. And I replied, sounds very nutritious. The wilder, the better in terms of nutrition, I believe.
Very good, yes. Yeah. Well, maybe it's a relative of parsley. Certainly like a bit of parsley quite often.
And Robin said, that's quite the poem. I've read it before, but hearing how you read it is so much better.
Oh, Robin, thank you very much. I'm very touched. Thank you.
And somebody said, Sim said, it reminds you of nettle soup.
Oh, yes. Well, very nutritious. Yeah. That's probably what Thoreau had a lot of when he was living in the wilderness. Nettle soup is meant to be hugely nutritious. I can't say I've ever tried it. Perhaps I should.
My mother used to make it when we ran out of food.
All right. Well, we'll go and get some nettles tomorrow.
We were sent to pick nettles.
Very good. I just wanted to end because I've been on a walk in the autumn woods earlier today, and I was thinking, it made me think of T.S. Eliot and his 4 quartets, which I just love the sort of mood he creates. As I say, he gets terribly obscure sometimes, partly because he was so well educated and couldn't resist putting in all sorts of literary allusions that nobody else could understand. But he's still, I think, a wonderful poet. And I'm going to read a bit of his 4 quartets, which I was thinking of. It came into my mind when I was walking down a path with lots of leaves underfoot. And goes like this. It's just an excerpt. Footfalls echo in the memory, down the passage that we did not take, towards the door we never opened, into the rose garden. Time present and time past are both, perhaps, present in time future, and time future contained in time past. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. Footfalls echo in the memory, down the passage which we did not take, towards the door we never opened, into the rose garden. My words echo, thus, in your mind. But to what purpose? Disturbing the dust on a bowl of rose leaves, I do not know. Go, 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 said the bird. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. Go, said the bird, for the leaves were full of children, hidden excitedly, containing laughter. Go, 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 said the bird. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. Time past and time future, what might have been and what has been, point to one end, which is always present. At the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards. At the still point, there the dance is. At the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards. At the still point, there the dance is, but neither arrest nor movement. And do not call it fixity, where past and future are gathered, neither movement from nor towards, neither ascent nor decline, except for the point, the still point. There would be no dance, and there is only the dance. I can only say, there we have been, but I cannot say where, and I cannot say how long, for that is to place it in time. All is always now, time past and time future, allow but a little consciousness. To be conscious is not to be in time, but only in time can the moment in the rose garden, the moment in the arbour where the rain beat, the moment in the draughty church at Smokefall be remembered, involved with past and future. Only through time, time is conquered. Words move, music moves, only in time. But that which is only living can only die. Words, after speech, reach into the silence, or say that the end precedes the beginning, and the end and the beginning were always there before the beginning and after the end. And all is always now. Words strain, crack, and sometimes break under the burden, under the tension, slip, slide, perish, will not stay still. Desire itself is movement, not in itself desirable. Love is itself unmoving, only the cause and end of movement, timeless and undesiring, except in the aspect of time, caught in the form of limitation between unbeing and being. And I remember that other snippet of T.S. Eliot, whispers and small laughter between leaves and hurrying feet. We don't always know what T.S. Eliot is really talking about, but he makes a great mood, I think. And that really makes me think of walking through autumn woods, thinking of time and life in general. Well, I think we're coming to an end of this. If anyone has any other questions, I'm happy to try and answer. I just think that poetry is so magical, the way it does so many things for us. People, when I was in my dissipated youth, I thought poetry was just a sort of silly pastime for people who didn't have anything positive to do. But now I realize that poetry is a huge agent for change, because it changes our feelings. If you want to feel happy or even angry or not bored, read some poetry. If you're already angry with somebody, try writing a poem about them. That'll change your mood. That'll change the way you see them. If you are feeling anxious, write a poem about it.
Or if you're in love with someone.
Or if you're in love with... Thank you, Rupert. Yes, that came from the heart.
And feeling you can't get anywhere and you've got nothing to do.
Yes. Poetry can be the answer to so many things. And it is nearly always not only a strong influence, but a benign influence. It can help in so many ways. It can help you when you're feeling really down. It can help you when you're really wounded and traumatized. Poetry is a real tool in therapy these days. Poetry does have slightly more sinister aspects. There's a lot of, if you take, Vladimir Putin springs to mind. He's a great one for using poetry, not his own poetry, I may say, but sort of epic Russian poetry to introduce his speeches as a way of legitimizing what he's about to say and legitimizing his whole regime. And other people have done that over the centuries. Stalin, before him, for example, used poetry. Stalin wrote reams of poetry, and everyone was so frightened of him, they, of course, had to say it was brilliant, which only encouraged him to write.
Good question here. Can we hear one of your poems?
Gosh. All right. I will. If you just bear with me a second, I will find a little book I once wrote, which is still available on Amazon, I may say. It's called Pulp Verses, which means it was inspired by the movie Pulp Fiction. It's not designed to promote me as a wonderful poet who sends shivers down people's spine. It's more designed to promote what I've just been saying, the idea that poetry can help you when you're feeling bored or anxious or angry. So many ways it can just help you change your mood.
You should show them the pictures too. Wonderful pictures.
Yes, I wrote this book in the form of a
comic strip.
Of a comic strip, exactly, just to show really that it's meant to be light-hearted. And I'll read you two poems, actually. They're very short, both of them. One is called Peebles Revisited. I used to live in Scotland, in Peebles, where I had a hotel, a pub, basically. And people were always, well, not always, but sometimes people would drink too much. And there was one particular lady who rather got under my skin. And when I went back to Peebles a few years after I sold my pub, I went into a charity shop and she was behind the counter. And we sort of smiled at each other and said hello rather awkwardly. And I wrote this little poem after that. It's called Peebles Revisited. Here it is. The lady behind the counter in the charity shop smiles a bright welcome, hoping I won't remember the night 10 years ago when she trashed my pub after 7 shots of Sambuca and a couple of spliffs.
Show them the picture too.
And that's the picture I wrote too. And then it's full of pictures like that. They're all taken from comic books. Slave Girl. And I wrote another book, another poem called Irish Tomb Raider. I wrote this when I was extremely bored. I was working in Ireland and I was basically living in a bed and breakfast. And at the weekend, I went on a coach trip to see an ancient monument. It was Ireland's equivalent of Stonehenge, really ancient stones, which it's called Newgrange. And it's a very wonderful site. I mean, it goes back thousands of years. But I went there in a coach on a very wet, gloomy autumn day. And basically, it was just some rather wet stones that I was looking at. And we had to wait around a lot you had to park the coach and then get in another coach to go in a sort of minibus across a lot of fields to see this. And some people were very bored. Some people were just taking selfies with their phones, and I thought, oh, that's what people always do. They take a selfie and then they never look at it again, or they put it on Facebook and that's it. And I thought, I'm going to be different. I'm going to write a poem. It's something that will give me more satisfaction than a selfie, and it's something I may remember more. And so I did this, and I'll tell you another secret. I'm sorry I'm going on, but I have a bad habit. Wherever I go in the world, I like to pick up a tiny pebble and put it in my pocket as a souvenir. And I've been to all kinds of places like ancient Greece and Athens, Africa and America. And each time I picked up a tiny pebble. And I went to the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, for example, and I've got a tiny stone from there. So when I went to this prehistoric place, I did pick up a stone. It was actually from the car park, but it's a souvenir. Anyway, it's not something I'm proud of, but it features in this poem, you see. This poem is called Irish Tomb Raider. A prehistoric heritage site, it predated the pyramids. I held one of the ancient stones in my hand. It felt quite ordinary. When I left, it came with me. I planned to replace it one day with the stone that I took from the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. It won't exactly even the score, but it might raise some interesting questions. Archaeology should be more exciting.
It makes you sound like a grave robber.
I know, that's why I called it Irish Tomb Raider. And I'm very sorry, it's not something anyone else should do, but I've stopped doing it now.
But I think we need to show them the picture because it's so good. I'm going to try to get it in front of the camera. 100,000, a million years ago, yeah. So you've been around a while.
I'm sorry if you asked that question and you expected some beautiful lyrical poetry or some love poetry. I have written one or two.
We got 2 feedback. I love it and it's so cool.
Oh, bless you. Well, thank you very much. I still write poetry, but I don't really like to inflict it on other people because I know that it I may have talents. I'm not saying I'm no good at anything, but poetry, I'm never going to be Shakespeare, and that is something I have accepted. So, gosh, I've really enjoyed this this session. Thank you all so much for being here, and I hope we can meet again. I'll be doing the same thing all over again next Monday at 6 p.m. And thank you very much to Rupert too. And if you're in mind of an interesting book, Rupert writes about travel. He's been all over the world. I think there's nowhere he hasn't been. And he does it all on a shoestring. And he's done so many fascinating things in so many places, haven't you?
Well, I think you're over-exaggerating a bit.
Well, he's written some very good books. If you Google Rupert Wolfe Murray.
Okay, I can share my my blog. Yeah.
Yeah, he does a brilliant blog about travel writing too. So that's where we are. But poetry changes lives. All I can say is that poetry changed my life so much, and it still continues to change my life. It often is the answer to my problems today. If I'm wondering what I'm going to do next, I can read a poem or write a poem. And if I want to know how to handle a situation, sometimes I say a prayer, sometimes I ask for guidance, sometimes I think of a poem or a poet who has had a similar situation, and I ask myself, could I do the same? And quite often the answer is yes. So thank you all for listening. I think we're done now.
Bye.
Hope to see you again. Bye for now.